You know, if I sell 18 million in my first week, I think I'm gonna just, on my next album, I'm gonna just build me a Taco Bell in my backyard.
Eminem walks into Taco Bell for a quiet meal, but freezes when he overhears two boys whispering. And what they say shakes him to his core. It was nearly midnight when Eminem realized he hadn't eaten all day. The hours in the studio had flown by, as they often did when he was in the zone. He'd been fine while working, running on adrenaline and coffee, but now that the session was over, his stomach was making itself known. He could have called in something fancy, or even asked his assistant to grab food, but he wasn't in the mood for that. He wanted something fast, greasy, and satisfying, something simple. That's when he thought of Taco Bell. Pulling on a hoodie and some sweats, Eminem grabbed his keys and headed out. The streets of Detroit were quiet at this hour, a mix of the late hour and the November chill. As he drove, he kept the heater on low and turned the radio down. It was one of those nights where he just wanted quiet. As Eminem pulled into the nearly empty Taco Bell parking lot, he had no idea that a simple late-night craving would lead to an encounter he'd never forget. When the Taco Bell sign came into view, glowing like a beacon in the dark, he pulled into the parking lot. It wasn't empty, but it wasn't packed either. A few cars idled in the drive-thru, but he decided to go inside. It would be faster, and he wasn't in the mood to sit in his car waiting. The cold air bit at his face as he stepped out of the car. Pulling his hoodie tighter, he walked briskly to the entrance and pushed open the glass door. The warm, familiar smell of seasoned beef, melted cheese, and taco shells greeted him immediately. Inside, it was quiet. A couple of teenagers sat in one corner, their heads bent over their phones, while a man in a reflective work vest was halfway through his meal at another table. The cashier behind the counter looked half asleep, leaning on his elbow as he stared at the register. Eminem was relieved. It didn't look like anyone was paying attention to him. He slid into the short line, glancing up at the menu even though he already knew what he wanted. Crunchwrap Supreme, side of nachos, and a large drink. It was his usual. But just as he was about to step forward to order, he felt it. Someone was watching him. At first, he thought it was just paranoia, but then he caught a whisper. "Yo, is that..." The voice was quiet, but in the mostly empty restaurant, it wasn't hard to hear. Eminem kept his face neutral, pretending not to notice. "No way," another voice whispered. "Why would he be here?" "I'm telling you, that's him," the first voice insisted. Eminem sighed internally. He didn't turn around but could feel their eyes on him. He wasn't in the mood for this tonight. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate his fans. He did, more than they probably realized. But sometimes, you just wanted to be another guy ordering tacos. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the counter. The cashier didn't seem to recognize him, which was a relief. Eminem ordered quickly, paying in cash to keep things simple, and stepped to the side to wait for his food. The whispers hadn't stopped. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see them. Two boys, sitting a few tables away, leaning toward each other like they were trying to figure out what to do. One of them was holding his phone low, like he was trying to snap a picture without being obvious. Eminem considered his options. He could bolt as soon as his food was ready, avoid the situation altogether, or he could turn around and say something. Before he could decide, the taller of the two boys stood up. His friend hesitated but followed him a moment later. They were heading straight for him. Excuse me," the taller boy said nervously when they were close enough. Are you Eminem?" Eminem turned to face them, his expression calm but unreadable. He studied them for a moment. They couldn't have been older than 14 or 15, skinny kids in jackets that looked too thin for the cold. Their wide eyes gave them away. They were nervous, but excited. "Depends," Eminem said finally, his tone even. "Why are you asking?" The shorter boy grinned, nudging his friend. "Told you it was him," the taller one laughed nervously, scratching the back of his neck. "Man, we're huge fans. We didn't want to bother you, but we couldn't just sit there and say nothing. Your music, it means a lot to us." Eminem tilted his head slightly, studying them. "Appreciate that," he said. The shorter boy chimed in. "My older brother got me into your music. He said it helped him get through some rough stuff, and then it helped me too. Like, whenever I'm having a bad day, I just put on your songs, and it's like, you get it, you know?" The taller boy nodded quickly. "Same here. My dad left when I was little." and there was a lot of stuff I didn't know how to deal with. But your music, it made me feel like I wasn't alone. Eminem didn't say anything at first. He was used to hearing fans say things like this, but it never stopped hitting him in a way he couldn't quite explain. The idea that his pain, the things he'd poured into his music, could help someone else, it was humbling. "I'm glad it helped," he said finally. The shorter boy held up his phone, his hand trembling slightly. "Would it be okay if we got a picture? We won't post it or anything. It's just for us." Eminem hesitated. He wasn't big on taking pictures with fans, especially when he was trying to stay low-key. But something about these kids, their sincerity maybe, or the fact that they'd worked up the courage to talk to him, made him want to say yes. What he did next will shock you. "All right," he said, nodding, "but make it quick." The boys lit up, fumbling with the phone as they tried to line up the shot. Eminem leaned in slightly, keeping his hood up but giving them a small smile. "Got it," the taller boy said, grinning from ear to ear. "Thanks, man," the shorter one added. "This means a lot." Eminem nodded again. "No problem." They stood there for a moment, as if unsure whether to leave or say something else. Finally, the taller boy spoke again. "Can I just say one more thing?" Eminem gestured for him to go ahead. "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I didn't give up. There were times when it felt like things would never get better, but your music kept me going. It gave me hope." The shorter boy nodded. "Me too. My mom was really sick last year and it felt like everything was falling apart. But listening to your songs, it made me feel like I wasn't alone." Eminem felt his chest tighten. He didn't know what to say. Moments like this reminded him why he did what he did. But they also reminded him of the responsibility that came with it. "Look," he said finally, his voice quieter. "Life's tough. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. But you gotta keep pushing. No matter what, just keep going." The boys nodded, their expressions serious. "We will," the taller one said. "Good," Eminem replied. Just then, the cashier called his order. Eminem grabbed his bag, giving the boys a small wave as he turned to leave. "Thanks again, man," they called after him. Eminem didn't turn around, but he raised a hand in acknowledgement as he walked out into the cold night air. The air outside was sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of the Taco Bell. Eminem stood next to his car for a moment, the bag of food in his hand. His breath came out in white puffs, and the encounter with the boys replayed in his mind. He'd heard fans talk about how his music helped them countless times, but something about those two kids stuck with him. Maybe it was the rawness in their voices, the honesty in their words. Or maybe it was because he saw a piece of himself in them, the lost kid who'd once turned to music to survive his own battles. Sliding into the driver's seat, Eminem set the bag of food on the passenger side and leaned back. He stared out the windshield, his mind swirling with thoughts. He wasn't one to dwell on encounters like this. Over the years, he'd learned to take them in stride. But tonight felt different. Fishing around the car's center console, he found a pen and a folded receipt from a gas station. He hesitated for a moment, then scribbled a quick message. "Keep your head up. Don't let life knock you down." It wasn't much, but it felt like the right thing to do. Eminem wasn't one for grand gestures, but he knew how much a few words could mean when someone was struggling. Grabbing the note, he stepped out of the car and headed back inside the Taco Bell. The boys were still at their table, talking in hushed tones while staring at the picture they'd taken. Their faces lit up as he approached, clearly not expecting to see him again. "Hey," he said, keeping his tone casual. The taller boy froze, wide-eyed. Hey, did we do something wrong?" Eminem smirked and shook his head. "Nah, you're good. Just wanted to give you this." He handed the note to the shorter boy, who unfolded it quickly. His eyes scanned the words, and his mouth opened slightly in surprise. "You wrote this for us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eminem shrugged. "Figured it might come in handy." The taller boy leaned over to read it, and a grin spread across his face. "Man, this is awesome. Thank you. Like seriously, thank you." Eminem nodded. "Take care of yourselves, all right?" "We will," the shorter boy promised, clutching the note like it was the most important thing he'd ever held. Eminem gave them a small wave and walked back out. This time, he felt lighter. A few weeks later, Eminem was scrolling through his phone during a rare moment of downtime. Between recording sessions, interviews, and family commitments, he didn't get much time to relax. But that night, he found himself absent-mindedly scrolling through social media when something caught his eye. A video was going viral. The caption read, "The night we met Eminem at Taco Bell." Curious, he clicked on it. It was a shaky, low-quality clip of the two boys he'd met. They were sitting at the same Taco Bell table, retelling their story to the camera. "So, we're at Taco Bell, right? Just grabbing something to eat," the taller boy said, his excitement clear even through the screen. "And then, we see this guy in a hoodie, and I'm like, 'Dude, is that Eminem?'" The shorter boy chimed in. "I didn't believe him at first, but then I got a good look, and it was him. Like, Marshall Mathers, just standing there ordering tacos like a regular guy." But just when they thought the night couldn't get any crazier, Eminem did something they never expected. Stay tuned to find out what happened next. The video cut to a shot of the handwritten note Eminem had given them, carefully framed for the camera. "He didn't have to do this," the taller boy said, his voice quieter now. "But he did. And that's why he's the real deal. He doesn't just talk about helping people, he actually does it." The comment section was flooded with stories from fans all over the world. Some shared how his music had helped them through depression, grief, or tough times. Others just expressed their love and respect for him as an artist and a person. Eminem leaned back in his chair, letting the video play out. He wasn't someone who sought validation, but seeing how much that small gesture had meant to those boys, and how it had sparked a wave of connection among his fans, felt good. That night, Eminem found himself sitting at his desk with a notebook in front of him. He hadn't planned to write, but the words were coming anyway. He thought about the boys, about how their struggles weren't all that different from his own when he was their age. Life hadn't handed him an easy path, but music had been his way through it. And now somehow his music was helping others do the same. The pen scratched across the page as he wrote, not worrying about rhyme schemes or melodies, just letting the thoughts flow. He paused, staring at the words. They weren't polished, but they were real. And sometimes, that was enough. Sliding the notebook aside, he leaned back and closed his eyes. The Taco Bell encounter might have been a small moment in the grand scheme of things, but it reminded him why he kept doing this. It wasn't just about the music or the fame. It was about the connection, the shared struggles, the understanding that no matter how dark things got, there was always a reason to keep going. But what happened next wasn't just about a note or a kind gesture. It sparked something much bigger. Stay tuned to see how this unexpected moment turned into a movement that changed lives. The next morning, Eminem woke up earlier than usual. That Taco Bell encounter still lingered in his mind, but this morning, it felt less like a passing thought and more like a call to action. He grabbed his phone off the nightstand and scrolled to his manager's contact. After a moment of hesitation, he hit call. "Paul," he said when the call connected, "I've been thinking about something. Let's talk later." Paul Rosenberg, his longtime manager, didn't ask many questions. "All right, just say when." Over the next few days, Eminem's usual schedule carried on. Studio sessions, meetings, and some time with Haley and his family. But whenever he had a moment to himself, his thoughts kept circling back to those two boys and the note he'd given them. The viral video they'd made stuck with him too. He'd read some of the comments, and the overwhelming response was a reminder of the reach his music and his actions could have. One comment in particular stood out. "Imagine if more artists did things like this. It's not just about being famous, it's about making people feel seen." That night, he brought the idea to Paul. "What if we started something?" Eminem said. Paul frowned. "Something like what?" "Something that's bigger than the music," Eminem explained. "A way to reach out to people who are struggling. Kids, especially. They've got enough going on in their lives without feeling like they're alone in it." Paul leaned back in his chair, considering. "You're talking about charity work?" "Not exactly," Eminem said. "I mean, yeah, we'd help people, but it wouldn't just be about money. I'm thinking more along the lines of giving kids a voice, letting them know someone's listening." Paul nodded slowly. "All right, I can reach out to some organizations, see what we can do." A few months later, the idea became a reality. Eminem launched a new initiative, the Real Ones Project. It was focused on connecting with at-risk youth and giving them tools to cope, whether through art, music, or just having someone to talk to. He partnered with schools, community centers, and mental health organizations to set up workshops and mentorship programs. Eminem wasn't just putting his name on it, he was showing up. Quietly, without press or fanfare, he visited some of the workshops, sitting with kids and sharing pieces of his own story. At one event, a girl barely older than 12 told him about losing her mom to addiction. "It's been really hard," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I don't even want to get out of bed. But listening to your songs, it makes me feel like someone understands." Eminem nodded, his voice gentle when he replied, "I know how that feels. I lost someone close to me too. It doesn't get easier overnight, but you've got to keep fighting. And you've got people here who care about you, all right?" She nodded, tears in her eyes, and Eminem stayed with her until she smiled again. One day, during a quiet moment in the studio, Eminem thought about those two boys from Taco Bell. They'd unknowingly set all of this in motion, and he wondered how they were doing now. On a whim, he reached out to his team. "Think you can track down those kids from the video?" It took a few weeks, but eventually, they found them. They were still in Detroit, still living in the same neighborhood. Eminem arranged a meeting, though he didn't tell them it was him they'd be meeting. When they arrived at the studio, their eyes went wide. "No way," the taller one said, grinning ear to ear. "You wanted to see us?" Eminem smirked. "Figured I owed you guys a proper thank you." "For what?" the shorter boy asked, clearly baffled. "For reminding me what this is all about," Eminem said. He spent the afternoon showing them around the studio, letting them see where the magic happened. He even let them record a few lines, guiding them through the process with patience and encouragement. Before they left, he handed each of them a small notebook. "Keep writing," he told them. "Doesn't matter what it is. Songs, poems, whatever. Just get it out. You never know who might need to hear your story." Months turned into years, and the Real Ones Project grew bigger than anyone had expected. It wasn't just a local initiative anymore. It was nationwide, helping kids from all walks of life find hope and purpose. Eminem kept a low profile about his involvement, letting the work speak for itself. But every now and then, he'd get a letter or a message from someone whose life had been changed by the project, and it reminded him why he'd started it in the first place. And as for those two boys, the taller one eventually became a youth counselor, inspired by the way Eminem had listened to him that night at Taco Bell. The shorter one pursued a career in music, using the notebook Eminem had given him to write songs about his life and struggles. Years later, when asked about their success in an interview, they both pointed back to the same moment. "It all started at a Taco Bell," the shorter one said, smiling. "The night Eminem reminded us that even the smallest acts can make the biggest difference," the taller one added. And somewhere in Detroit, Eminem, sitting in a quiet studio with a notebook in hand, and smiled to himself.